Welcome back. Today, we're going to look at one of the top 3 most famous stories in the Bible, the story of Daniel and the lion's den. And we're going to use this story to talk about developing the habit of courage. Courage, as we saw in one of our previous sessions, courage is a foundational virtue, particularly for men. And most of us wish that we had more of it. Courage, I want to show you in this session, is not a personality thing. That's what a lot of people assume. Nor is it something, contrary to the movies that we watch, courage is not something you conjure up in a moment. Courage is developed through a lifetime of small, consistent decisions. Courage is a pattern, a habit that you program into your heart. You know how when you type something into Google and it auto-completes for you? That drives me nuts, by the way. Just because I searched that one time for the current net worth of Zach from Saved by the Bell doesn't mean that that's what I'm looking for anytime I go to Google anymore. Leave me alone, Google, okay? But Google understands that we follow patterns. And so it auto-fills our search bar according to how we have trained it to react, how we've acted in the past. Well, the same thing is true with how you respond to adversity. Your heart auto-fills your response based on the patterns that you've established in the past. Courage is an autofill habit that you build up from years of consistent patterns. Daniel 6, let me remind you the context. Babylon has been overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. That was the whole handwriting on the wall incident. Nebuchadnezzar and all the royal family have been killed, and King Darius of the Medes now sits on the throne. Daniel is over 80 years old at this point, still living in captivity in Babylon. But the new king, Darius, has kept on his court a lot of Nebuchadnezzar's wise men, including Daniel. Verse 3, Daniel distinguished himself because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king planned to set him over the whole realm. And one thing to point out here, no matter where Daniel is, no matter what circumstance he's in, or how he got there, or how unfair his situation, Daniel stays positive, upbeat even, believing that even in the worst of circumstances, God had a plan. Daniel was always on the lookout for what God was doing, and that created new opportunities for him wherever he went. Some of us are so upset at the unfairness or the unluckiness, we think, of what has happened to us that we miss that God has an opportunity for us in this moment. And by the way, when all this goes down, Daniel is over 80 years old. It doesn't matter how old you are, God still has ways that he wants to use you. Verse 4, the administrators and the satraps, therefore, because they were jealous, kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. They didn't want him to be in charge. They didn't want him to be their boss. But they could find no charge or corruption, for Daniel was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Finally, verse 5, these men said, we will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God. So they went in together to the king, and they said to the king, may the king Darius live forever. Verse 7, we have all agreed that the king should establish an ordinance that for 30 days, anybody who petitions any god or man except for you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. The weak spot that they found in Daniel's armor, and I got to hand it to them, it's pretty ingenious. The weak spot is built around Daniel's faith and the king's ego. Basically, what they're saying to King Darius is this, "O king, your subjects need to learn that they can depend on you for everything. So let's make a rule that for 30 days, people can only bring their needs to you. No other gods. We're not saying they can never pray again. We're just saying for 30 days, only bring the needs to you, because that'll give you a chance to prove that you can provide all their needs and that they don't need to trust in anyone else." Verse 8, therefore, your majesty, establish this edict and sign the document so that as a law of the Medes and the Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed. The Medes and the Persians had this custom, you see, that once a law was passed, it could not be changed. The purpose, historians tell us, was to keep kings from passing arbitrary laws all willy-nilly just because they were in a bad mood. They get beat at pickleball by a left-handed guy, so they outlaw left-handedness. What happened is that kings would make these kinds of just spontaneous laws, but then a couple of days later, the king would calm down and everybody would recognize that this was a stupid rule, and so they would have to go back and change the rule. So the Medes and the Persians instituted this custom that no law could be changed to try and keep the king from looking flighty. The king was supposed to be divine. He's supposed to make no mistakes, and when he passed stupid rules, it undermined his authority. This custom helped limit that. So bottom line, this law got passed, and now it can be changed. So what's Daniel's response? Verse 10, when Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house, he opened his upstairs window toward Jerusalem, And 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God. Watch this phrase, just as he had done before. Y'all, there it is, the habit. Daniel has prayed 3 times daily now for 70 years. He done it in Daniel 1 when they tried to force him to eat forbidden foods. He done it in chapter 2 when the king threatened to kill all the wise men because nobody could interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. His friends, Daniel's friends, had done it in Daniel 3 when Nebuchadnezzar tried to force them to bow down to his golden image. Whenever Daniel felt afraid, whenever he felt threatened, he turned to God in prayer. So his response here in chapter 6 is as predictable and as natural to him as breathing. His heart auto-filled the space of fear with faith. So here's my question for you. What is your instinct when you get pushback for some moral stand that you've taken? Typically, we have one of 3 responses. The first response, panic. Panic, we get scared and we cave. Look, there's no way out of this. The pressure's too strong. If I do this, I'm going to be marginalized or fired, or I'm going to become a social outcast. All my friends are doing this. Everybody in my business does this. This is the societal norm and it cannot be changed. And I don't really have a choice here if I want to survive. Panic is one response, and it's a wrong one. A second response to this kind of pressure is pride. You bow up at the opposition and you say, "You're not the boss of me. I'll show you." Well, this is also a wrong response, but this one is tricky because it can look on the outside like bold faith. Unlike faith, however, when you peel back the layers of this response, what you find is not a humble dependence on God. What you find is a heart of self-sufficiency. This response comes more from a "I'm better than you" spirit than a "I'm going to do what God wants and trust him with the results" spirit. So you can respond with panic, you can respond with pride, or there's Daniel's response, prayer. Daniel says, "I'm going to lay this at God's feet because ultimately these are his problems, not mine. I'm not responsible for my life. He is. All I'm responsible to do is what he tells me to do." Panic, pride, or prayer? Which response is your default in the face of danger or pressure? You've got one. What auto-fills in the search bar of your heart when hard times come? When you type P into your heart, what auto-fills in the rest? Is it panic? Is it pride? Or is it prayer? Daniel chose prayer because Daniel trusted in God. And so that evening he prayed as peacefully as he had every other evening for the last 70 years. Of course, the other wise men see Daniel do this, which is what they've been hoping for, and they run to the king, scarcely able to contain their excitement. Verse 12, "Oh, king, we just hate, king. I hate to tell you this, but after you signed this irrevocable edict, we all saw Daniel praying. We all just happened to be on the balcony right across from his house, all looking through our binoculars at the exact same time as his regularly scheduled prayer time, and we all saw him. And sadly, king, you know the law of the Medes and the Persians. It can be changed. So we've prepared the lions right this way, sir." King Darius, of course, sees through their ruse immediately, and he's pretty upset by it because he really likes Daniel. But he's also bound by this ridiculous custom that you can't ever change a law, and so he feels like he has no choice but to throw Daniel to the lions. Verse 16, "So the king gave the order. The king said to Daniel, 'May your God, whom you continually serve, and that God rescue you.' Verse 17, "A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him. He turned off his Netflix and put away his Xbox, and he couldn't sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, 'Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually—'" By the way, let me stop. Do you see that repetition of the word continually in the story? The author is just reinforcing that these are habits that Daniel has practiced his whole life. "Has your God, whom you continually, habitually, daily serve, has he been able to rescue you from the lions?" Verse 21, "Then Daniel spoke with the king. He said, 'Oh, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They have not harmed me, for I was found innocent before him.'" Daniel's down there peacefully taking a cat nap like he's snuggled up in a cadre of kittens. It strikes me when I read this story that literally everybody else in this story was up the entire night, except for Daniel. The jealous wise men are up all night partying because they think they'd killed Daniel. The king was up all night worrying. Daniel's friends are up all night praying. The angel was up all night protecting. Daniel was the only one who got a good night's sleep. And the next day when the king ordered the stone rolled away from the mouth of the den, there's Daniel snuggled up peacefully with a book, reading between the lions. Okay, you see what I did there. That was free. Verse 23, the king was overjoyed and he gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed because he trusted in his God. Wait, you see that? Why does this text say that God saved Daniel like this? One reason, because Daniel trusted in his God. When you trust God, things happen. Heaven moves. Doesn't always mean things go smoothly for you, as we've seen in Daniel, but when you trust God, heaven moves. Verse 25, then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live on the whole earth, and he said, may your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion, people must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, for he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty good little sermon, and it's from a pagan king. That's the second awesome sermon we've had from a pagan king who was converted by Daniel's influence. Daniel is the book in the Bible where we see amazing sermons preached by formerly pagan kings. And how do they learn these things? They learn them from Daniel and his friends' consistency and courage in the face of danger and opposition. That's the whole point of Daniel. If we live like Daniel, we'll shine like Daniel. Listen, Babylon is not a place for spiritual weaklings. Babylon is ready to chew you up and spit you out. In Daniel's case, literally. But for those who live with wisdom, for those who live with consistency and courage, they will. Remember our verse, Daniel 12:3? They will shine like the brightness of the heavens above, like the stars forever and ever. Two things from this story I want to leave you with. First, courage in the lion's den comes from consistency in the prayer closet. Like I said, Daniel doesn't summon up courage the moment he's thrown in the lion's den. His courage didn't come from the particularities of his personality because he was a certain number on the Enneagram. No, Daniel's courage was the result of years and years of small, faithful acts of obedience, patterns that Daniel had laid down for decades. Let me make a prediction about your life. If you wait until the hour of trial to decide whether you're going to stand, you will not. Do you want to know that you'll have the courage to stand when everybody around you caves? We can predict how you'll respond then by what you're doing now. Remember, courage isn't conjured up in the heat of the moment. Courage comes from consistency in the prayer closet. Second, understanding Jesus as the greater Daniel fuels courage. You know, one of the mistakes that people make when they read this story is they turn it into a hero tale where we are supposed to aspire to be like Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel was how I often heard it preached when I was a kid. And as I've shown you, there is certainly much about Daniel's life worthy of emulation, but that's not the main point of this story, nor any Old Testament story for that matter. The Old Testament is not primarily written to give us heroes to emulate. It's written to point us to a Savior to adore. Jesus was the real Daniel. He was the greater Daniel who went into the lion's den of God's judgment for us and shut the mouth of our accusers so that we could pass through that den unharmed. Think about it. Daniel and Jesus were both falsely convicted on bogus charges. Like Daniel, Jesus was thrown to the lions of judgment at the hands of jealous leaders. But unlike Daniel, no angel came to stand by Jesus and shut the lion's mouth. When Jesus went into the lion's den, he actually died. The lions of judgment circled him, they taunted him, and they tore him apart. But Jesus resurrected, and in so doing, he defeated the power of death on our behalf so that we would never have to fear death again. Knowing Jesus as the greater and truer Daniel gives us the courage to face danger even more bravely than Daniel did, believe it or not, the strength to be even more consistent than Daniel was, and a reason to get up and keep going even when we've fallen. Friend, Jesus took all the punishment for your inconsistency, and now he promises to preserve you in the den of any and all lions that you face today. With Jesus, you'll have the courage to face anything. Trusting Jesus fills us with spirit-fueled courage to shine in Babylon. So start establishing those patterns of courage and faith today.